Hey guys, we're happy to have with us today my dear friend Jillian. I've known
Hi,
Jillian.
everybody.
I've known Jillian for about many years now, and I had no idea that all this time she was actually a very popular Chinese entertainer, YouTuber, and now she's transitioning into being a regular American YouTuber. So I want to talk with Jillian, find out what that whole experience has been like and what this transition's been like.
Okay, yeah. It's fun. I feel like it's so crazy that you didn't know this. I feel like this is something that we've talked about, but I guess not. Yeah. So about what was it? I think it was maybe like 3 years ago or something like that. I started working on a Chinese channel, and just to give a little bit of context there, I went to college in Taiwan. So when I was in Taiwan, I was a Chinese major. And so I always wanted to do something with it, but I wasn't sure what exactly I wanted to do with it. So a few years ago, I started a Chinese channel. YouTube is actually banned in China, so my primary demographic couldn't really reach, they couldn't really see my videos on YouTube. So I had to use the Chinese equivalent of YouTube. And it's actually a crazy thing. They're like a bunch of different YouTubes. They don't really just have one primary one the way we do. So I was using one called Bilibili, and the other nickname for it is Bijan. And that's just one of the many Chinese YouTubes, basically. So I amassed, I think on that site, I amassed something like, I think it was like 65,000 followers or something like that. And then on YouTube, it was much less because, again, my primary demographic just wasn't really seeing you. They weren't able to watch those videos on YouTube.
They were pretty
But I
much
think,
expats, right?
yeah, basically, it was mostly overseas Chinese. So people who, were from China or were they're from China but studying abroad, or people in Hong Kong, people in Taiwan, people in Malaysia, just, places where YouTube isn't blocked, but people speak Chinese as a primary language, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, I did that for about maybe, it might have not even been 3 years. I think it's been about 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that. And I recently transitioned mostly because I sort of just realized I didn't really enjoy making that kind of content. I was really, like the followers were really growing, but I didn't really feel happy. Even though the numbers were going in the right direction, I wasn't really particularly happy with the quality of the content. I thought I couldn't necessarily make the exact kind of content I wanted because, of course, there are still things like language barrier. I started learning Chinese when I was 18 years old, right? Like it's never going to be, I'll never be able to express myself in the same amount of depth that I can in English.
Hmm.
There's nothing wrong with light entertainment. I just don't think I personally feel passionate about creating light entertainment. And then, of course, there's the issue of like when you're speaking a language that isn't your first language, there's always, sort of that that voice in the back of your head, like, is what you're saying 100% grammatically correct? Does it sound funny? Is the vocabulary you're using a little weird? Stuff like that.
Your mom comes from a theatrical background, and I noticed that there are a lot of similarities in terms of how you speak. It's very Broadway-like. It's very entertaining. Yeah, very jazz
Jazz
hands.
hands.
So I could definitely see how that translates into a market that always wants to be constantly entertained by something. But I also see in Broadway a mix of both that kind of, very razzle dazzle entertainment and that,
Vaudevillian.
yes.
Well, but gesticulating in general is generally a sign of better communicators
Oh,
because it's added layers to language.
well, I've always liked to think of myself as a good communicator, so I'll take it.
I mean, it helps. You help keep people engaged and focused.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
And
I did get that from my mom. My mom is a big gesticulator. She uses her hands and facial features a lot when she's speaking.
and with the videos that you're doing right now, you're talking about movie reviews, but mixing it in with philosophy. So you are upping the ante away from just, like mukbang or something like that.
Yeah, mukbang. It's so funny. I never actually did a mukbang, but I always thought I was this close to it. I was always like, when I didn't have an idea, I was like, this week, this is going to be the week. This is the mukbang week.
What's that?
This is
What
your
is that?
fallback.
What is that?
Oh
Mukbang?
oh my gosh. Mukbangs. Lev, tell them what a mukbang is. It's crazy. It's like, it's like when basically you just sit and watch people eat food, right, Lev?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I think people get an enjoyment out of that close to what they would get if they were actually eating the thing. Like my favorite mukbangs are the ones by Steve 1989 MRE, who takes all of these old school military rations from the 50s, 60s. Like the oldest thing he's eaten was a cookie from the Civil War, which tasted like mothballs. So,
I haven't watched his videos, but I've seen like the thumbnails for his videos on YouTube.
well, what he loves the most is the cigarettes that he gets there, because he says that they taste way better than most of the cigarettes today. They don't have any of those harsh chemicals in there. It's all pretty natural, and it's just really high quality. And I'm not a smoker, but it seems like a lot of people today have just gotten the shitty end of the stick when it comes to that.
Wait, are you talking about he gets cigarettes from when?
From like the 1950s, like old packs of Camels.
How does he find those though?
I know, through collectors who have these military rations.
What I was saying was the kind of content I'm creating on my English channel is, and my English channel is like super new. I only started it last month, at the beginning of last month. But I've been enjoying it so much more just because I'm making content that I really want to make. I'm making content that I'm really interested in making. And it's just a little bit more, as you said,
What kind of stuff?
all kinds of stuff. It's what I would say is there's one channel on YouTube I really, really like that initially gave me inspiration for my channel. It's called Nerd Writer. Really, really great stuff, like just super high quality videos. And basically what he does is he makes videos on things that he thinks are interesting. Often it's sort of pop culture, movies that have recently come out, television shows that have recently come out, or, classic movies and shows. Sometimes he does stuff on art, history, philosophy, psychology, that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to...
What TV shows are you watching right now?
I've been like reading a lot more recently than watching TV shows.
HBO shows?
I did see a few episodes. My husband was watching it. I did see a few episodes of The Witcher.
Do you and your husband watch stuff together?
You know what? We generally don't, because we don't usually like the same kinds of stuff.
Really?
Not usually, because I really like serial killer stuff.
Who doesn't like that stuff?
I mean, I like my husband. He doesn't like it, so he
creeps him out. He's like, I don't want to watch this with you.
No, he won't watch any of that. He won't watch any of that kind of stuff with me. So absolutely not. And then sometimes he watches, what did he?
But you're talking Mindhunter.
I did see Mindhunter. I didn't like it that much though.
I didn't see the second season yet.
That's the thing, because I didn't like the first season all that much. I didn't really watch the second season.
First season was good. First season was great.
No, it wasn't bad. It was definitely good. I think as far as recent television shows I've watched go, I thought it was pretty good. I just prefer to watch the documentaries about the serial killers.
The documentary.
I'm more of a documentary person.
Did you watch True Detective?
No, that I feel like. See, that sounds so familiar. I feel like I actually haven't watched True Detective.
Well, I saw the first episode of The Witcher, and even though I may watch some more, I don't know, just there's something about it that just seemed to be rehashed over and over again. Like, I saw similar fantasy elements and other things before, so at this point, it's like, I know there are other things that I may like to do rather than watch this.
Well, see, yeah, that's why I let my husband watch it first. I watched one episode and I was like, listen, if this is good, you can let me know and then maybe I'll keep going. But I just found I didn't really like it very much. I found whoever that bard is, that guy that just like follows him around and like sings The Witcher, that guy, I couldn't stand him. I was like, I can't do this.
I mean, he's probably hard to typecast in movies, right? Because how many people walking around look like Superman, right?
Thank you. That's what
Right?
I've said. That's what I say to everyone all the time. They're like,
He's literally Superman.
Yeah.
He's literally like, what is he gonna? What else is he?
There's more people that look like Shrek.
He's supposed to look like the obstacle to Tom Cruise, right? He's like the obstacle to Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, and then now he's The Witcher.
I completely agree with you. I just feel like the only role he was meant for is Superman, and then he can't do anything else.
Oh, come on.
He just looks like Clark
You're
Kent.
horrible. You're so mean.
It's true.
You're so
That's
mean
that's all he
you're
can.
so mean to Henry.
He's not. I feel like he's not a very good actor. He's just like a gorgeous Clark Kent, and that's it. In my opinion, this is subjective opinion.
You know, I read an
Henry, if you're
interview
watching this,
on.
could you
I read
imagine
an
Henry
interview.
Cavill was watching?
I read a
This is
interview
what he
from
does.
Humphrey. I read an interview from Humphrey Bogart, and it was some critics were asking him how he had such a powerful performance, and particularly when they wanted to play, was it the French national anthem, and he nods his head to let the orchestra play, and they're like, "How did you like capture that moment and that energy when you like?" You know, they like puffed it all up, and he goes, "I had no idea what we were doing. Like they just put the camera at my face and they said, nod your head." And then I nodded my head, and then that's what they put to cue the orchestra. And so how is his acting? Right? It really depends on the director too. Like Alfred Hitchcock literally thought his actors were meat. Like he had no respect for his actors. He was,
I've heard that.
Yeah.
it doesn't even matter.
Didn't he say the line
Like
actors
they're
or cattle?
props. He saw them as props, right? It was like, and he didn't even look in the lens when the camera was shooting, because he was like, he had planned out the blocking so well that he was like, I don't even need to check the lens. I told you what I want.
Yeah.
Like, I know that's what you're gonna get.
Stanley Kubrick's approach was a bit different, although from what I understand, he was very hard on the actors, but in such a way that the actors saw him as this big genius, they would jump through hoops for him, like Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. You know, like he made them take all kinds of takes, like hundreds and hundreds of takes.
127.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the record.
How do you know it was 127?
Because I know.
What movie was this?
Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh yeah, of course, Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was a very special movie for a lot of people. I think that's like the first movie that introduced people to the idea of rich people having, you know, very interesting tastes when it comes to what they like to do late at night with each other.
When I first saw it, like that whole level of it, like didn't even occur to me. Like I didn't even start like to me, like as a kid, it was always like, what action figures do you have? What video game console do you have?
Oh yeah,
It never
movie
really
came
like
out when you
occurred
were,
to me.
like 7 or something.
Like all the architecture and all the like wardrobe and all that kind of stuff. Like I literally saw this movie really young.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Same here. Well, I saw A Clockwork Orange when I was 7 years old. That
Too young for that.
Well, I don't know. We were from the USSR. We were living in an area where people put carpentry on their walls so that it wouldn't get too cold. And usually, even though we had our own apartment back in the USSR, most families were still living in communes, like they were living together. So when it comes to the way, let's say, WASP Americans like Jules Hamilton over here was raised, it's very different.
I wasn't really raised. I don't think I was really raised like a wasp. I think my dad was raised like a wasp, and he was a rebel wasp. And so I had a rebel wasp dad.
And so
I
then,
don't really think that makes me a wasp. Wasps are pretty much extinct.
Later.
Well, speaking of China, China did a porno in China called One Night in China.
oh right, I do remember. I remember that. Don't ask me how or why, but I remember that. And I remember like hearing that news and being like, "Whew, okay, that is a muscular woman. Good for her. There's something for everybody."
I just like how much emphasis they put into that wordplay, that they would buy a ticket to the actual China and perform there.
So was it bad?
Oh, of course it was bad. It was pretty bad. And it's a mix of sex and tourism.
Wrestling.
Well, no wrestling in this one, but it was like the husband was going around China. He was seeing the sights, like he was seeing the Forbidden Palace, and he was making just like some off-color remarks, like about Chairman Mao and things like.
Oh no, that sounds really bad.
That's weird. I can't. Yeah.
It's like he
I don't
said
want to
something
picture
like
it.
he said something like about Mao. He says something like Mao Zedong, ga Kong.
Chairman Mao, I got 2 words for you. Good.
Oh, that's bad. Well, I have gone this far in my life without watching it, and I probably can go the rest of my life without watching it. But
Probably so. But
thank
you've
you
been
for your review.
You're welcome. But you've been watching a lot of very good movies recently, like I don't know, Little Women. That was
That was good.
yeah.
It was good. It was really good. I actually did a video on that. That's my most recent video. I'm actually working on a new video now. I've been editing it all day. But my Little Women video was basically, there were a few opinion pieces like in the New York Times and Washington Post and whatnot that were like, Little Women didn't make as much as Star Wars at the box office opening weekend. It must be men. It's sexism that they don't want to go see Little Women. So it's basically just about how like, you can't really fault people for having interests. And if men see the title Little Women and think, oh, that's probably not for me, I'm not going to go see it. That's okay. That's not a problem. So.
It is one of the classics. It is one of the all-time greats.
Oh, it was a really, honestly, it is one of those things where I would definitely suggest people go see it. I thought it was really, really good. But that being said, I get that kind of film is targeted for a very particular audience, right?
Have you saw it?
I did not see Little Women.
Could you tell us a little bit about the plot? Because I don't really.
Sure. It's really, really good. It's basically about 4 sisters in the Civil War era sisters. And basically, I mean, it's so funny because if you just try to explain the plot, it sounds quite boring, but it's actually really not when you watch it. It's basically just following the life of these 4 sisters and looking at how they all make different life decisions, right? So one of them, for example, is kind of like the independent firebrandy type. She never wants to get married. She wants to make her own way in the world. She wants to be a writer. One of them wants to be a famous artist in Paris. Another one really just wants to be a wife and mother. She's very traditional in that sense. And the last one is just kind of the sickly one who's always at home because she's always sick and she likes to play piano. So it doesn't really necessarily sound super exciting when you explain it.
Sounds interesting.
But actually the book is good. And I thought to be fair, this is the only version of the film I've seen. Because they've made a bunch of different ones, right? But I thought that this iteration was really quite good. I thought the acting was good. The directing was really good. Very good. Very good.
We have to see it.
Really good. Really good. Yeah. I liked it a lot.
The one thing that I could kind of count on when it comes to adaptations of novels is that it seems to be at least that when novels, since they're not written by a committee, it's not going to be as prevalent, just this insertion of certain plot points into the story in order to appeal to certain groups of people, let's say, that the committee wanted to appeal to, because it all ends up looking really fake. I think that may have been the situation with Mulan. You were doing a review of that movie talking about how the classic story of Mulan had nothing really that much to do with her wanting to escape the clutches of the patriarchy. It was about helping her father with the war.
That's an interesting thing in China right now too. They don't really, this is like a hot take from China right now, which I'm like kind of on board with. They don't really think the idea of an overarching patriarchy is as much of a thing as we do in the West. Which, personally, I kind of tend to agree with that a little bit. So that culturally is something that I find quite refreshing. Mm-hmm. So the point that, and I was reading Chinese Twitter, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, which is called Weibo. So I was reading Weibo kind of to see what people were saying about this Mulan thing. And a lot of people were saying, that they like Mulan. Obviously, they have no serious problem with Disney's adaptation of Mulan, but one of the things they do take issue with is the fact that Disney sort of shows her kind of like as someone who's more, she feels more like she's a tomboy, or she's stuck in the society where she has to, I don't know, she kind of has to play the role of a woman, but she doesn't necessarily fit into that particular gender role. But there's nothing in the actual Chinese myth that says that at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, it's not like she went to the army, because she was trying to escape her womanhood, right? It was just like she was doing what she had to do because her father was an old man, and he didn't have a choice, right? Like, he would have had to go if she didn't take his place. So
Yeah, the Huns are coming.
the Huns are coming. I don't remember in the original Mulan poem, like in the original Ballad of Mulan, I don't remember who they were fighting. It wasn't the Huns, but I don't remember who it was. But
See, Disney completely ruined our historical
the Huns.
perspective just because
wasn't
for a catchy song.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is a catchy song though. Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. It's a catchy song. But yeah, and really their main point is if it looks like she's escaping her femininity, that's almost like saying there's something wrong with femininity,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lack of power in femininity. And the idea in China is that, especially, post Cultural Revolution, they think that as far as masculine and feminine energies go, they're equal, and you don't really have to, you don't have to masculinize her for us to take her seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Is I guess their point, and a point that I agree with.
How much do Chinese people that you've talked with treat, let's say, the concept of masculine, female, like yin yang energy from the point of view of, Taoism and things like that?
Oh, well, that, I would say, I guess if you're talking about things like feminine energy and masculine energy and traditional gender roles, things like that, they obviously, in terms of a cultural value, they put high priority on things like education.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, for such a long time, the one-child policy was a thing. So girls, especially at that time, were really encouraged to go out and get a good education, because if not, who was going to take care of the family, right?
Yeah.
One kid. So I think as far as equality goes, and I actually have some Chinese girlfriends who have told me that they prefer working in China because they think that there just is a lot less sexism. They feel like they're not really discriminated against in the workplace by men. But at the same time, it's sort of interesting and paradoxical, because at the same time, gender roles are also more accepted.
So it looks to me like Confucianism still plays a really important part in China, where I think more things that I was talking about, like Taoism, when it comes to yin yang, like those kind of different energies, that's more in the back of people's minds. Like, people don't really think about that. It's more about, let's say, still honoring your ancestors, making a family, making all that part right. And the family, from what I understand, is way more important to the Chinese than, let's say, the individual love interest. So family would always come first.
Oh yeah. Well, of course, that's one of the biggest. I mean, I personally am a big fan of that particular value, and you see that a lot in East Asian culture. I know it's a pretty significant value in Korea and Japan as well, but I'm most familiar with it, obviously, in the context of China, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is true. They have huge emphasis on the community, on putting the community and the people in your community above, your own personal individualism.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually, the whole thing about being, what is it? Oh my gosh, I suddenly can't remember the word in English. It's 孝顺 in Chinese. It's 孝顺. What is it? Filial piety, right? Filial piety, the whole idea of, honoring your parents, being respectful of your parents, doing whatever your parents want in order to honor them or make them happy, that kind of thing. Huge, very big value there, which, I think pros and cons, right? Like, it's a pro in that I think that community is really important to a person's overall well-being. That being said, I think it can probably become a little bit stifling too when you're living your life for someone else and not yourself. So pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
Individualism.
Absolutely.
And what a big cooperatism, is that what they call it? Yeah.
Well, the Chinese also have a term called Baizuo.
白做.
Yes.
Okay.
And from what I understand, it's supposed to be a derogatory term meaning white left, and it's supposed to be derogative of Western left-wing ideology.
白做.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. So and I can tell you this because I've had a lot of experience speaking to Chinese people about this kind of thing. They generally speaking, they tend to be a little bit more conservative in their values anyway. So I think in my experience, there has been a lot of criticism of, I don't want to say like SJW ideology. I don't want to say that because I feel like that sounds kind of discriminatory.
Really?
Maybe a little bit, right? Like I don't want, because I definitely, there are a lot of leftist values that I think are really wonderful, but I also do agree that sometimes it can go a little too far.
Well, I just
What
think
are
that those are liberal values, I'd say, more than leftist values. I think, like in terms
Oh,
of
yeah.
Said any specifics though?
Oh, that's actually a good point. I think that I wanted to say, Lev, that's a good distinction. I think the difference between liberal values and leftist values are different. So I would say, probably I'm more along the lines of I'm fine with liberal values, but some leftist values are a little, I don't know. And I think that a lot of Chinese people feel sort of similarly about that.
Their government is where the left wants to be.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That's a theory. I've heard that theory. Yeah, I've heard you mean sort of more communist.
I mean, you could call it a theory.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about that? I honestly haven't looked too much into it to really say I know one way or another.
Like, what do I think its root comes from Plato's theory of forms.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like the ideal this, the ideal that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think now with AI, it's very easy for a small number of people to control a large number of people.
Sure.
And with the censorship system that China has, with everything, like they have execution bans, they've got the facial recognition everywhere, they've got the China firewall. It's they're spying on everybody. It's they're also able to make unilateral decisions. Like they're able to swiftly change their infrastructure, and just like the way their government works, there's no real restraints on it other than like uprisings. Like opposed to here, like we have a lot of checks and balances and restraints on power that work, that are supposed to like prevent the need for uprisings. It's just sort of like that's not supposed to happen here, right? It's only supposed to happen if the government gets out of control, right? So that it doesn't become that left-wing model. But if people are unconvinced that there aren't faster ways to avoid like a climate emergency, or if there's no other way to accelerate like massive projects without like government sized funds, then the pendulum will keep going that way. Like the tug of war will keep leaning that way.
It's very dangerous. And I think a lot of leftists here in the United States see in China all these different capabilities that they have of controlling their own people, and they salivate at the thought of it. If only we had the same ability to control all of these people that are totally out of order and want to ruin the planet, then we could finally have our utopia on Earth. And from what I also heard from this an assistant professor here in America, in this very left-leaning institution, the students there, they feel bereft of power. It's more like they're just always gloomy, and the only time when they would ever feel complete would be when the revolution finally comes. Other than that, they're just acting pretty apathetic. They don't even have the drive that, let's say, their predecessors a couple of years ago had when they were protesting things they found to be, xenophobic or bigoted or anything like that. Like he says, like now students are just, sitting down and just bored all the time, waiting for the revolution to occur.
Well, I feel like a big problem with millennial activists is, and I want to clarify specifically, I'm talking because I don't really have context anywhere else, but I think in America, for example, I think really for a lot of these people, there isn't really that much to protest about. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why they're kind of giving up, why they're just
right.
designating to waiting.
Who's giving up?
So let me clarify exactly what I mean. I think that, I think it's sort of two issues, right? I think one of the issues is now in the age of social media, we are bombarded with bad news all the time from a million different sources in a million different directions. And I think it can get honest. I mean, I've certainly had this experience, and I've talked to other people, other millennials who had this experience. It gets to a point where you become cynical and jaded because you're just bombarded. It's this constant bombardment of bad things are happening. There's this awful thing and that awful thing and climate change and, female genital mutilation, all these things we can really do nothing about. And I think it sort of just gets to a point where people become apathetic because they're so bogged down in this feeling that they're unable to do anything. And so then I think as a result, they start complaining about things that they feel like they can have an impact on. And often, like what you see in a lot of these liberal universities, is really first world problems really is the only way to put it, because I think it's the only way people feel like they have power. It's the only thing people feel like they have any control over.
I'm not sure if that's fair. I think there's a strong chance there's been a morale op.
What do you mean by that?
Something that we would do to overthrow other governments is you have to destroy the morale of the citizens. You make sure that all the people playing on the radio are depressed and like talking about how miserable they are, how terrible their breakups are, how they can never get over their breakups, how they keep falling, or they're drinking, or they're committing suicide.
A bigger conspiracy, or what do you mean?
No, it's not a conspiracy. This is like, you could like look at the CIA's Twitter and they can be like, look at the history of morale ops and like how we overthrow governments. Like, this is not like tinfoil hat stuff. This is just like,
sure, but like how
rules of war 101.
But
this
how
is just like,
but what do you mean? But
elementary.
I guess I don't understand how that relates to my point about the universities.
So if you engage in a 20-year plan to destroy a generation's morale, because that's what some of those operations are, because you're basically, it's like, who said it? Was it Lao Tzu who said, if your plan is like one day plant rice, if your plan is like 10 years plant trees, if your plan is 100 years like train children. Okay. So if your plan of 100 years involves a morale op, you could have a plan of for 100 years that has a positive morale op, a neutral one, or a negative one. The negative one would be to dominate them. It would be
then who do you think
do them?
Who do you think is planning this, I guess, is my question then.
It could be, it's probably mostly a mindless accident, because how these things work is in feedback loops. It's like wagging the dog. So if you know how like echo chambers work and gossip circles work and the game of telephone works, and you know who have the biggest megaphones and like who are the journalists at which sources, you can sort of spread and permeate not just ideas but moods.
Mm-hmm.
I could also testify to what happened before when the Soviet Union was still in power, that there was a defector from the KGB, Yuri Bezmenov, who was talking about how the USSR was using demoralization against the United States from the 60s onward.
It makes them easier to subdue, right? So if you want to take all the guns away, you don't want a bunch of euphoric, hyperactive, optimistic people. You want a bunch of depressed, scared, nebbish people.
Okay.
And if you know you have a Second Amendment, you're like, well, we are never going to be able to get those guns away unless there's an mental illness epidemic. And that epidemic is going to be used for the urgency of taking all the guns away. I think that there's also not only psyops, but suppression of information that makes it easier to overcome the psyops. Like magic mushrooms, which they're legalizing now, is sort of like a reset where it can kind of, my understanding is like if you have a lot of like calcified trauma, you can kind of like wash it away. Yeah. Like an Etch-a-Sketch.
Okay. And that's being legalized now? Is it actually?
It is being
I thought
legalized
that would
now.
never happen.
Yeah. Well, we had a guest who specializes in that stuff. He's a prolific author,
That's right.
New York Times contributor. And then you got Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, just invested in a magic mushroom company, and Peter Thiel as well. And a friend of mine was on 60 Minutes. He did a trial where he did magic mushrooms and it helped him overcome alcoholism. It was like, it was a remarkable transformation.
I've got a friend who's a psychiatrist, and he said that they're doing trials now as well on people with personality disorders with mushrooms, actually, because people that suffer from personality disorders, that's not something people are generally, well, there are genetic components, but a lot of it has to do with the environment you grow up in and the defenses you sort of develop for yourself in order to protect yourself from trauma. And nothing has ever been helpful for helping these for doing something for these people. They've like suffered their entire lives, but apparently they've actually been seeing some progress when they do therapy with these people when they've taken mushrooms. I certainly do think there are people that you can help and are receptive to that help. But ultimately the real change that happens, it has to be the individual who's suffering to make that decision. You can't change them for them. And the definition of codependent behavior is thinking you can do something to control another person's behavior. And at the end of the day, you really can't.
No, you can't.
You can influence people. There are some people who are too far gone. Like, for example, I mean, this is obviously a very extreme example, but if you're taking someone like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy, I certainly wouldn't want to be the one to give them love and compassion and try to convert them. You know what I mean? Like, there are some people who are just too dangerous, either to your physical health or your emotional well-being. And at a certain point you kind of have to jump ship with certain people. There's nothing you can do with them.
What attracted you to Taiwan?
Well, probably, honestly, like probably looking back on it, I would have chosen mainland China just because at the time I was very naive sort of about the political issue between China and Taiwan. And at this point, it's very awkward for me because if I tell people I went to school in Taiwan, I have to be very careful, like who I'm talking to. Because if you're talking to people that are like pro-Taiwan, you have to be really careful. If you're talking to people that are pro-China, so that's really, it's like that politically has nothing to do with me. I don't want to get involved in it because I know everyone has their own opinion for whatever reason. But because I went to school in Taiwan, that always comes up when I'm speaking to people who either identify as Taiwanese or Chinese. And that's really frustrating. So I kind of just wish I could have like completely avoided the political situation altogether and just have gone to school in like Shanghai or something like that. But I originally chose Taiwan because I had a teacher that was from there and she really liked it. And she said, go to school in Taiwan, not mainland China. And at the time I didn't know why she said it. Like, I didn't know why she was, so pro one and not the other. I was just very ignorant about it. But really I would have just gone to school in mainland, like looking back on it. But I chose it because my teacher was very adamant that I should go. And also I thought it might be interesting to learn the traditional Chinese writing system because they have traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. They use traditional still in Taiwan and Hong Kong. They use simplified in mainland, which was something that was a product of the Cultural Revolution. They simplified the entire writing system. So I wanted to learn the traditional one because I was told if you learn the traditional one and then the simplified, it's much easier than the other way around.
Sure.
And that was true. So I can read both now.
Wow. But
That's
what
like in 1984, right? When they simplified the language.
Well, I think, you know, I think they really thought that, because at the time literacy rate was very, very low. And I think they just, you know, I think the motivation was actually pretty benign. I think they just wanted to make more people literate.
How hard was it for a Westerner like yourself to learn this language?
It's hard. It's interesting. I feel like it was, for me, right? For me personally, I felt like it was easier than Spanish, right? Because I took some Spanish in high school, and I personally found Chinese easier. And I think it has to do with how your brain works, right? So I am not very good with sequences. It is difficult for me to learn sequences. So for example, there's a lot more sequencing in romance languages. You have to worry about verb conjugation. Is this feminine? Is this masculine? And it's very difficult for me to remember little details like that. Whereas with a language like Chinese, the grammar is incredibly simple. There's no conjugation. There's no feminine or masculine. The word for he and she is the same, right? It's the difficult component is the writing system, right? Because there's instead of an alphabet, there's a character for literally every word. So there are thousands and thousands of words you have to learn. But I'm a visual learner, not a sequence learner. So I found memorizing thousands of characters much easier than remembering grammatical patterns, right? So I think it just sort of has to do with how your brain is set up.
Where do they eat dogs?
Oh my God. They don't really, it's like a huge stereotype that everyone in China eats.
No, I know it's not
definitely
that common. I know it's not that common.
Yeah, it's not common. My husband and I where were we? I don't remember where we were, because we were in China this summer because he had never been, and he wanted to learn some Chinese because he doesn't speak, and we want to teach our children Chinese, so he thought he should learn. I don't remember which city we were in. Oh my gosh, where was it? I think it was Guilin, maybe. I think we were in Guilin. And we did sit down in one restaurant, and they did have dog on the menu, which I was very, very surprised, because I have never met a Chinese person who's eaten dog. It's a huge stereotype. I've never seen it.
I don't even think it's really a stereotype. Everyone just gets upset about it at that festival.
Really, like, when you break it down, right? There is no real reason why you would eat pig and not dog. Like, there's no logical reason. The only reason is we have an emotional attachment to dogs because they're man's best friend, right? Like, when you break it down, like,
yeah, pigs, they don't have a little tongue that they can lick you with, that they could slobber all over you when you walk into the room.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, I was a vegan for a few years. I'm not anymore. I got very sick doing it. I think I just did it wrong. So I actually do sympathize with vegans. I 100% understand where they're coming from. But at the same time, I can like sort of look on the other side and be like, yeah, well, if you eat pig, like, what? Why not eat dog? You know what I mean? Like, it kind of is like, where is the...
Well, because their consciousness is supposed to be the same. Like an octopus's consciousness is supposed to be like, if you're saying like, okay, we eat fish because we don't see it as the same as a monkey, or but the thing is, it's kind of like, we don't eat monkeys, we don't eat dogs, we don't eat bugs.
Do octopuses feel pain? They do, right?
Yeah, I think they do.
Actually, octopi are supposed to be incredibly intelligent.
Yes.
So I imagine they probably do.
Because their neurons are on their tentacles. Because the way their brain works, they don't have like a localized brain. Their brain is like their whole body.
God, but they're so delicious.
But when a bit of an octopus is cut off and it regenerates that limb, does that mean that those pieces of brains now, they're disconnected from the rest of the brain, but they don't really function independently, right? Like,
Love, we don't know that. Could you imagine if I was just like, I have the answer. Oh, I know. I specialize in this. We don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it's fair though. I don't know.
it's something to think about. Like, if you take little octopus limb, just have that as your pet. You know, like discount octopus as pets, just like chop little limbs off and give them to the kids.
It'd be weird if they grew back both ways. Yeah,
That's true, right? Like, imagine that, like a chia
they
pet.
don't though.
You just put a little octopus limb in the jar, and then a couple
It
of
just
days later,
grows
yeah,
like
exactly.
a full octopus in no time.
Like an earthworm.
Yeah, like an earthworm.
Yeah, well, one day. I mean, we're getting there. We're getting to human-animal hybrids now. So,
Ooh.
yeah, like what kind of animal?
That's going on in China.
It is, yeah.
We should be
Back in
doing
China.
more of that over here.
Oh,
Hopefully,
yeah.
that's what they're doing in the Hollow Earth in Antarctica.
Yeah, with all the, what is it? With all the penguin pituitary glands.
That's right.
That's
That's right. We
Pineal
talked about
glands.
this.
But yeah, so the whole dog thing, yeah, I've never met a Chinese person that eats dog, but it was crazy to see that on the menu. So anyway, yeah, back to Taiwan. It was a great experience. It was really good. And I feel like I was very lucky because I had teachers who spoke very standard Mandarin, because in Taiwan, there's a very distinct sort of Taiwanese accent. And it's not necessarily, I mean, it's subjective, right? But it's not necessarily, depending on who you're talking to. Some people really like a Taiwanese accent, some people don't. So I really liked that I had teachers that taught me very sort of standard Mandarin, the kind of Mandarin you'd learn, you know, in Beijing or at a top tier school in Shanghai, you know. So I think that was good. I didn't want to learn any sort of specific regional accent. So I'm glad I learned this more standard variety.
And did you start getting enculturated with other parts of Chinese culture? Like, I'm a big admirer of the tea ceremonies that they have, and Jules has attended with me one of those ceremonies where they have this really high quality tea. It is one of those things which I really admire because it's very nuanced, the flavor of a lot of these teas. So it's not like you're just getting like a heaping spoon of sugar in your mouth and you're just being bedazzled by all of this intensity. It's more of like you got to concentrate a bit. You got to figure out what's going on in your palate. And it's similar, I think, to a practice they did in ancient China where they smelled different flowers that, you know, they smelled close to each other, but it was up to the smellers to discern what was the difference between each flower.
In my experience, because the thing is, like, when you live in a country that long, really all you want to do is blend in the best way possible, because it gets to a point where if you sort of spend too much time looking at huge cultural differences, or maybe not even huge cultural differences, just cultural nuances, it's very easy to feel like an outsider. And at a certain point that's an isolating feeling. So I think at first I maybe did that, you know, because it was all bright, shiny, and new. But after a while, I just wanted to feel like I belonged. So at a certain point, I don't really know. It's really hard to describe. It's sort of just like hanging out with people in another culture and speaking another language. It's just like, it's basically the exact same experience that you have in America speaking in English. It's just in Chinese. Right. So it's like you talk about the same stuff. You have the same emotional vulnerabilities, the same kind of insecurities. You laugh about the same things. You get mad about the same things. Maybe the TV shows you watch are different, or like your cuisine of choice is a little bit different every night. But for the most part, I think it's a very similar cultural experience. And at the end of the day, I think that's what you want. You just want to make friends and connect with people and feel like you belong to some degree. I'm generally more of an optimistic person, right? I prefer to look at the cup half full. I prefer to surround myself with people that are generally pretty positive. And I think, you know, you can find positive people anywhere. You can find fairly pessimistic people anywhere. And, you know, it's the same sort of weeding out procedure that you have you know, when you're speaking to people in English, right? You just talk to people and can pretty quickly gauge whether or not they're going to be a positive energy in your life or a toxic energy in your life.
Hmm. And most of the people that you've talked with in China, how do they view the future as far as like, do they view the future for themselves living in China as cup half empty or half full?
There's a general sense of gratitude with young people that you don't have in America, I think. And I just think it's because, you know, relatively speaking, you know, they can like talk to people, their
Yeah.
parents, they can talk to their grandparents and be like, wow, you know, that really puts things in perspective to me for me. That puts things in perspective for me. I had no idea, you know?
Well,
Also
this
says
is
if they complain too much, they'll get thrown in the, what is it, the Iron Horse or whatever? What is that thing?
oh
Oh,
God.
well, you know, I honestly don't know anything about that. Thing is, when it comes to how the government works in China, I honestly, because so much of my work has been targeted towards a Chinese demographic, to be honest with you, I haven't read a lot of what America says about China because I don't need
America
that.
loves China.
No, but I mean anything about
If
like
you ask Americans.
the issue about like, you know, I guess what you're saying, these things that are very anti Chinese government, I actively do not read
They
that
make all
stuff.
our stuff.
I don't read it because I don't read it.
Yeah,
because
you shouldn't. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, don't.
it's just, it's
Yeah.
not, the thing is when you work in that, when you work in any sort, when you work in that domain, right? Like I don't want to take any sort of negative thoughts that I've read somewhere else and bring that into my work.
So interesting.
You see what I mean? Like I just don't need it. I don't need it. It's toxic. If I'm
It's
sitting here,
contagion.
well, if I just sit here with all this like this anti-Chinese government, if I sit there with all of that toxic energy building in me and I'm talking to a primarily Chinese demographic, that's sick. That's toxic. That's
I'm
not
not anti-Chinese government. If the Chinese government went away, like I just think it should be peeled back. Probably, I think they should be nudged and encouraged to be humane and you
I mean,
know that's what it's
but,
all about. It's
but
not
this is
about like
but this is the
the end
thing.
of China.
No,
Like
I
what is
understand
that?
that. No, you don't understand. You can't even say that.
Yeah, I know.
You can't say anything, okay? So that's why I
Yeah.
don't read anything about it. I don't say anything bad about it. It is toxic for me to work in that environment and have any of that like sentiment in my brain. So that's something that's
So
been
interesting.
it's really, that's been very, very hard for me. And that's one reason I've had to peel back from doing the Chinese channel as well, because I honestly I hate struggling with that, struggling with like, I know this is how China feels about certain issues. I know this is how America feels about certain issues. How do I come to terms with that in my own head? It's honestly so stressful, and I don't want to be in the middle of it. I don't want to have to be that representative. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's been very stressful for me because, you know, you can't even hint that kind of stuff on Chinese social media. You know, you have to be like very pro about everything all the time. And so I don't like read anything.
But that's why their morale is so great.
Oh yeah.
And I'm saying
Honestly,
we could learn something
we could
over
learn.
here
That's what I think.
as far as the mental illness goes. Like we don't have to like.
I agree. A lot of Westerners would go to China and get mad about this quote unquote propaganda that was up, because they have a lot of like signs that are all over the place that are promoting social harmony. And a lot of Westerners look at that and say it's propaganda, but these are Westerners that don't read Chinese. They don't know. Like I can read Chinese, right? It's not propaganda.
It's all propaganda.
Well,
We're propagandists.
but like, it's not, what I mean is, I guess when I use the word propaganda, it's not like, you know, it's not negative propaganda. It's like propaganda sort of like, it's positive, right? Like, it's like, you know,
Propaganda is propaganda. I don't think it's positive
Well,
or
no,
negative.
the difference.
I just don't want to use that word because it has a negative connotation. Do you see
Mm.
what I mean? And I don't mean it negatively.
Well, like for example, in the USSR, there
Like
were
a
a lot
public
of
service announcement.
yeah.
Right.
That's a better way of putting it. Like in the USSR, there are a lot of posters back in the 70s, let's say, of Brezhnev, and before him, you know, posters of Khrushchev, before him, Stalin. I would not put that in the same category of positive propaganda, for lack of a better word, because it's still concentrating on a certain individual who cannot be questioned. But if you have other things like, build a birdhouse, or, like whatever, like here, plant gardens, that's
Yeah,
fine.
and that's the kind of public service announcements I'm talking about. Those that are all over China. Like it'll say like things like, be polite to your elders, be nice to children. If you see old people that are by themselves, help them cross the street. If you see a pregnant woman, help her cross the street. Like there's a lot of stuff like that, which I would say, I don't want to use the word propaganda because again, that has a negative connotation, but something more like a public
Not
service
here.
announcement. Well, yeah, but I mean, to anyone who might be watching, a lot of people will hang on to
No
that.
misunderstandings. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to have any misunderstandings. So I think that is one thing, honestly, like America could take a few tips in terms of morale. And I think a healthy dose of nationalism is actually good. And I think I hate like young Americans, like America's like the worst, like it sucks, blah blah blah, it's the most racist, it's the most sexist, it's like, how ungrateful are you? Like,
No, well, I think if a specific person has specific complaints, like you should meet them, and the historical record everywhere is a mess. I think
it's also
that
about the
the
growth
role
of
of
these.
history has a lot more to do with directing where you want things to go. So,
But you're saying directing things like you are the individual who is directing their own path, which is all well and good. But since we have a proliferation of the ego, where so many people are living as individuals, cut off from, let's say, the importance that the Chinese place, for example, on the family structure, and they're just going out, living their own lives. At the end of the day, especially with the internet, like we have our communities that we speak with on Twitter or whatever. I'm sure people have their social media communities, but that's still such a far cry from, let's say, back in the day. I'm not sure if this was Socrates or some other old Greek dude, but anyway, I heard a story about how he would go around Greece, and the amount of information he would accumulate over a day, just in terms of talking with the people who were in his city or town, would equal, if not exceed, the amount of words in books that people would read, sometimes for their entire lifetime, after the fact, like maybe in the modern era. So the point here is that there was so much interaction people were having, not just with their family members, but just with people about town. That was their entertainment, just being able to talk. And I feel like if people don't have that much of that quality, if they just go into their shells, in their boxes, in their rooms, that is something that's going to perpetuate a lot of this disenchantment and demoralization.
I agree with that.
So it's up to, I guess, the people who are now looking at the internet and seeing all the trouble that it can cause to try to figure out a way to maybe using the same technology to start making more of these smaller communities start thriving again. Because maybe at a certain point, people are going to get bored with just sending pictures of their food to each other. I don't know what's going to happen, but that may be a better way forward.
Yeah, I think social isolation could have a lot to do with general disenchantment for sure. But yeah, no, I'm definitely not saying like people, I guess I should make it more clear. I'm not saying if people have issues with the way they live or their life in America or whatever, they have problems that they feel are some sort of social injustice. I'm not saying don't talk about it. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying it's not a priority. I'm just saying to speak about it in a black and white way, like to say America is the worst, for example. I just don't think that is true. And I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a healthy perspective to take.
I think that people should be self-interested. So whatever narrative they have about America, they should know that it's in their self-interest. So if you're going to say America is the worst, you should be saying it in your own best interest. And some people sometimes, like, ridicule strengthens the ridiculed. Like, criticism is a way to error detect and self-correct. Like, pro-Enlightenment ideals is about, you know, conjectures and refutations and like constantly evolving your best ideas. So America started imperfectly, but it had the decentralizing document of the Constitution, and it was born from overthrowing a totalitarian government. So to say "Make America Great Again" is kind of stupid, because it's like, well, when was America ever great? Like, how could you say that 1776 was better than now?
Like, what does that
Well,
like? When was it great? Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint.
well, you could. Well, I think maybe the only time you could say that is 1776, which is when it was born from overthrowing a totalitarian government
Mhm.
and making a government of the people
Mhm.
through a decentralizing document,
Mhm.
right? But I think that nationalism is important because it's like an ant farm. If it senses danger, their pheromones will like from the top like spread through the colony, like in a domino chain reaction. Like one feeling the pheromone will like trigger the pheromone in another, will trigger the pheromone in another, will trigger the pheromone in another. And that's how they know how to collaborate without like communication. If you watch ants
Right.
like solve problems
Mhm.
like without communicating, like they're able to do that because of their animal instincts.
Mhm.
And nationalism is a trigger for animal instincts that people share. And if you numb those animal instincts in people, you put them at an evolutionary disadvantage, considering that we evolved those emotions from nature to help us survive.
Mhm.
We can't give out endless
Yeah.
benefits with
Mhm.
open borders. The border stuff, people want to end ICE. People are passing laws to make illegal immigrants untouchable and immune to laws.
Yeah. You know,
So
it's
so
it's just it's
it's
not
framed as xenophobia and bigotry to be anti-immigration to begin with.
to
And
begin with. Yeah. Like, it's already starting out there. Like, you have to really make your case carefully.
right. So you have to like, it's almost like you have to frame it in terms of like without causing panic too. It's like there could be a big collapse coming, and if you want to be able to like be able to take care of everyone and not be in a Titanic situation when there's not enough lifeboats, it's like you can't just overpack the boat, right? So that when it sinks, you don't have enough lifeboats. Because that was the problem with the Titanic, right? Is like the lower classes didn't have lifeboats. Everyone on the Titanic wasn't an elite, but not everyone had a lifeboat.
Yeah, the problem isn't the issue is it's just an infrastructure problem, right? It's just the fact
Yes.
that it is not feasible to be able to support that many people. That's the
Exactly.
problem. It's not it's completely understandable that the have that the have nots would want to be in a better situation, of course, and it's completely unfair and random that we were born in the United States of America and people were born in Venezuela, right? It's completely unfair.
It's not just in terms of infrastructure, though. It's also in terms of, let's say, if we want to have a society or a neighborhood where people are going to pass on similar kind of lessons of morality to their kids. Since people are born sometimes in very tough environments, a lot of the lessons they end up passing down to their kids are not necessarily the same as what would work, let's say, somewhere in Japan, for instance, if you're talking about like Cameroon or something like that. So it's not to say
We have neighborhoods here. We have Little Italy. We have Spanish Harlem. We have, you have Irish neighborhoods. You have Chinatown. You've got Little Korea or whatever, Koreatown.
mhm.
The point is like you have Jewish neighborhoods.
Mhm.
There's no like that happens. Like people are
Yeah.
free to do that. So I think the only instances when there's real problems is when you have a situation like the Rajneeshas, when you like it's basically like a religious community that is like for whatever reason, triggering like their neighbors to want to codify their religious community's behavior, right? And
Or you create
finding
you create these kind of situations where you create these pockets, right? These communities of people from specific foreign countries, and these little pockets, they can kind of sort of end up like, I know this is something that's been happening in England. There are like these little pockets of I think it's like these little Muslim communities, but the problem is when you have little pockets. This is just human psychology, right?
Mhm.
If you have a little pocket of a certain group of people that share like the same beliefs as you, whether it be religious beliefs, cultural values, things like that, and you're surrounded by people that think differently from you, that'll only sort of strengthen your resolve in those thoughts, and sometimes maybe extremify those thoughts a little bit. So it can be, I don't want to use the word ghettoization, but that kind of is what it is in these little poor communities, right? It's sort of
Mhm.
like they get this sort of tribalist mindset of like it's us against the world. And it's just I mean, I'm using an example of some little Muslim communities in England, but this is just human psychology, right? I think that's what happens with everybody if they feel like their back's against a wall and they feel
Well,
like
we talked with Oz Sultan about this. We had this guy on, Oz Sultan, who I've known for many years. He is a GOP Muslim residing here in New York City,
oh
and
cool.
we were specifically talking about this very issue with immigrants coming from Pakistan to England.
Mm.
One of the things that he was emphasizing was the importance of education, where a lot of these
Education is so
people
important.
came from families and societies that were not really that well educated, and it's also a shame that a lot of them came from marriages that were very close in terms of blood, so the kids end up
Oh.
having problems, mental problems. And a lot of these gangs, it's not even that their backs against the wall. If we're talking about, let's say, the Pakistan rape gangs, the ones who and recently there's been another story about this, sadly enough, where they take these young women and they pass them around from one person to another. So that's not a question of, oh, I didn't have a choice. That's like when one of these migrants was talking about having a quote unquote sexual emergency. So when I take a look at that, it's like, no, that is you coming from a culture where I don't know why exactly it happened this way, but it did. That kind of lesson that you are not supposed to do that kind of stuff did not get passed down to you and was not enforced heavily enough. So in that sense, in order to prevent things like that from happening, I think over time, like having a good economy prevents that from happening, but also just making sure,
Education.
yeah, education, making sure that everybody, but preferably education
a lot of those
for
are
the fact.
traditions though. So to your initial point, you're talking about like protecting tradition.
I
And
know it's like a
what about
double-edged
people
sword.
wanting to like build their own communities and protect
Well,
tradition?
okay. First of all,
It's like
there is no tradition I could think of that has the right to exist whose tradition includes turning one's back when some of your youths are having their way with some young women. If
Well, I
there's
have to agree with that. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I
no,
don't care what your religious
we
beliefs are. If you think
we
rape
agree
is
with you.
okay,
We agree with you, but there are cultures that disagree. And if they're all side by side, right?
But they're
And
not
there's
all
no
side
like
by
dominant.
side. The Indians, when they came to England, they enculturated themselves. So did by Indians, I mean like the Hindus. When the Hindus
right?
came to England, they enculturated themselves. So did the Sikhs. There's a friend of mine I know who's from Pakistan originally. She lives in Norway, and she is a Norwegian woman. She, goes to all their nationalist holidays, waves the flag, but at the same time, she's got a statue of Ganesh at home, and she makes curry.
Culture wins. Culture always wins at the end of the day.
No, but see that no, but that's my point. That's the problem with ghettoization. And when I say people have their back against the wall, that doesn't even mean they actually literally have their backs against the wall, but maybe just if they perceive there's an outside threat. They
No,
perceive
sometimes they
that.
do have their backs against the wall, right? And so
Sometimes
that's
they
the
do.
thing that I'm trying to.
Yeah,
You're
but
mentioning these
well,
Muslim communities, and you're
sure, but
mentioning people that have
no,
certain.
but if we are talking about Pakistani rape gangs, for example, I'm sorry, like I don't care if your back is against the wall. That's completely unacceptable. I don't care if your culture says that's okay. It's not okay.
the ghettoization, I think, makes other things worse. But even without ghettoization, like the Rajneeshs, like were not a ghetto. Like they were lawyers and yuppies and super wealthy, and they just wanted to like build a commune and build their little capitalist town. And all the outsiders were like, what the heck are they doing over there? And they started petitioning to the government to like say, they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to do this, like change them from doing that, like kick them out of here. We don't even want them in this town, like make them leave. And then they became venomous to the people that were trying to use the government to
Right, but Lev and I aren't
break up their
saying,
community.
Lev and I aren't saying, by no means are we saying we don't want them here, we don't like their culture, we're not saying that. We're just saying if you
No, I know.
they have more of an opportunity to be influenced by more than just one element, which is, you know, the small world of the tiny little community they live in, right? And then they're so heavily influenced by that, when they get out into the real world with other people, for example, then they feel threatened, or they feel like everyone else doesn't know and they have the real answers because they were in such a tight, tiny, small knit community and ended up becoming what really incredibly close-minded, right? So there just need to be more opportunities for them to fraternize with other people, and really all people, right, need more opportunity to talk to people that aren't like them and have different thoughts like them. You know, the older they get, can start making more moral decisions, better value-based decisions, and pass it on in turn to their children, right?
Absolutely.
Like everyone's going through culture shock right now because like the social media is in everyone's face and people are like, this, we have no model for this. We have no other example.
You have no
But then, like the
resource. You have no
Gutenberg
other
press, and like that started off really bad. Like the Gutenberg press did not seem like a good idea when it started.
There was a whole situation with the Anabaptists after the printing press, where now that you can read the Bible without knowing Latin, there were various cults that started to prop up. And one of those cults in Münster, Germany, had this guy who convinced everybody else that God was speaking to him. So God allowed him to take the young women of all the men in the cult as his wives.
Well, isn't that what they always do? First thing.
Did not take that long at all for that to happen.
Never does. That's always the first thing cult leaders say. Well, God
What?
told me I need to have sex with all your wives. Isn't that crazy? I don't want to. I hate having sex with lots of women. God told me to. I'm sorry.
I'm sure God did. I'm sure God did tell him.
But in the same way, I think memetics today plays a very important role in young people's lives, especially since
Memetics.
Yeah, memetics, memes.
Yeah,
People go on 4chan, people get all kinds of memes in their heads that still get retained over time.
Sure.
Which
I love them. I love them.
Do you have a favorite meme?
No, I love. Oh God, how can I choose? There's so many gems. I love. I've got like on Instagram, I've got like hundreds of memes saved. I love.
I imagine you like Belle from Beauty and the Beast.
That's not a meme.
That's a meme.
What meme?
Go to Twitter, type in GIF, type in Belle from Beauty and the Beast.
Okay, well, in that sense, everything is a meme.
Yeah,
but
everything's a meme.
Yeah, it's like, okay, when I say memes, let me limit it to, let's say, certain meme archetypical characters that have, sprouted out over time. I mean, obviously, there's like Pepe the Frog, Wojak,
You're talking dank.
Spurto.
You're like, that's a dank meme.
Well, like,
that's
that's what I like, dank memes.
Oh, you do.
So here's the thing. I feel really sad that the white supremacists kind of took Pepe the Frog. I feel really sad that they took Pepe Frog.
They never did.
No, they kind of did. Like Pepe Frog in the last few years has become like a weird white supremacy symbol, which I'm very angry about it. Because in 2012, I loved Pepe Frog. That was before he was like a thing for white supremacists. And now I can't say I love Pepe Frog anymore because they took it from me, and now I can't
They
like it.
didn't.
See, I disagree with you, Jillian. Well, for one thing, Pepe was brought to the fore again in the Hong Kong protests. They were using
No,
Pepe
they
the
took
Frog
him
everywhere.
too. Oh, no, everyone's taking
Yeah, she
him.
can't. Yeah, she can't go. She can't side with them.
Oh no!
I can't side with Hong Kong. I can't do it. So I like Pepe Frog, and everyone's taking him from me. I just want to use him when I feel depressed and like look in the
Well,
mirror.
you can use Spurto. Do you know Spurto Sparde, the guy on my wall over here?
That's too dank.
That's too That's too much.
That's too deep. That's too like dark web, deep 4chan meme shit.
What about
pretty Reddit.
Wojak? What about Wojak, the
Like
field
Orson?
guy? No,
Horse
not
guy?
Bojack. No, not the horse guy. Wojak, the feels guy. You know, like the wide, bald-headed figure. He's always together with Pepe. He's supposed to represent like the yang of Pepe's yin, or the yin of Pepe's yang.
Oh, Wojak. I didn't know this guy. Of course I've
Yes.
seen Wojak. Oh, he's another favorite. He is a personal favorite. I'm more of an Instagram meme girl. It's different.
Do you like the Instagram baked memes?
Like Powerpuff Girls and
Usually not. Well,
who's your favorite Powerpuff Girl?
I don't have one.
Your Buttercup.
No, she's my least favorite one.
How's she your least favorite?
She's too aggressive. I'm not a particularly aggressive person. Maybe I come off, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm.
No, Buttercup's the strong one.
She's the green one. She's aggressive.
She's strong.
I but Blossom is strong, but not aggressive, which is what I prefer. She's diplomatic. And
Mhm.
She's
prefer
yeah.
diplomatic than aggressive.
Yeah, Blossom is the middle path.
Right. I think I'll take Blossom.
Mhm.
When I was little, I liked Bubbles just because she was the blonde, but
Yeah.
that's because I was little.
Bubbles is. I always liked all three of them. I think
Mhm.
Bubbles is my favorite.
I think I don't, honestly, like looking back on that show, I don't think I like any of them. But out of all three of them, I feel like I identify most with Blossom.
You like Kim Possible?
No.
No.
Were you more Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, or Disney Channel?
No Disney Channel. That ish sucks. No Disney Channel. Both. Oh man.
What was your favorite Disney movie?
I don't know. I gotta think about it. Wait, but Courage the Cowardly Dog is probably my favorite cartoon.
I know that guy. He's nuts.
guy?
But Dilworth, who created Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Oh my god, that guy's a genius. You have to
He
introduce
is.
me.
I think he lives in Spain now with his Spanish girlfriend. I don't know. That's last I've heard of the guy.
That is what he'd do, that genius. Well, yeah, that's probably my favorite Disney movie. I don't know. What's your favorite Disney movie? I've got to think. Oh, I really like Tangled.
Mm,
I like Tangled a lot.
I have to see Tangled.
It's
it's
good.
good.
It's good.
I
I
have to
like
see Tangled.
The horse from Tangled I like.
Me too. I like the horse too. Let me think. I don't really, it's one of those things, I feel like Disney movies are one of those things, like after I've watched them 500 times as a child, now I don't watch them anymore. I have like no interest in seeing them again.
Mm-hmm. There was a series back when I was growing up called Bell's Story Time or Bell's Story Hour. I don't know if you remember this.
I don't.
There was like a live action Belle and this animatronic cat named Harmony. And
Are you making this up?
No, this is absolutely
Are you high, Lev? This is
no, you could Google it, Bell's Story Hour.
I don't want to.
Bell Story Time with Belle or something like that. And they did like musical sing-alongs. They did you love musicals. You sang the theme from Chicken Boo for the beginning.
Chicken Boo is a musical.
Well, Animaniacs, that's what I love about Animaniacs so much growing up, is that it introduced us to musicals because they were always doing musicals.
That's the best. That show is so underrated. That show was gold.
Oh, absolutely. It was like the best team of Hollywood writers just, coming up with concepts that only now that I look back at them, I'm able to get all the dirty parts.
Yeah, like old Simpsons, like you just look at it and you go, gosh, like.
No, I like stuff more like Tim and Eric. I know Jules hates Tim and Eric. He thinks it's the worst.
It is.
Oh, no, I'm alone in this one. But there is something that both you and me like, and I don't know what Jules thinks of it, but it's the Sickanimation's The Forefathers.
Oh man, that killed me. That was so funny.
Oh my
That
god.
killed me. I thought that was so funny.
He's a really talented animator and rap artist.
I just did not see it going there. Like, he's like, so tell me. I knew it was gonna be something weird, and then I was like, no.
All of them.
And
They
how
were
George
fine.
Washington is just like he does this all the time.
Yeah. Well, Mark does it all the time. Like, that's the kind of humor he's got. He grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana, which is not, it's not really a place that a lot of animators have come from. So he has his own, like,
No one's
southern,
there.
no, so he's got his own, like, he's like the dirty, what do you call it? Like, you know, like you have in rap culture, you have like the dirty South rap style. He's like the dirty South of animation. He's like the Master P of animation.
It's like what I like about I love when stuff is just like so unexpected like that. It just it really, oh man, it but like there's still like a very random quality to it. I love that.
And it doesn't feel too random. Like, it's not like they inserted something completely unrelated to what they showed before. Because in the setup, for those who don't know what we're talking about, The Forefathers is about the founding.
Put this up.
It's about the founding fathers who now in this modern age take care of a teenage girl who I guess is their adopted daughter. And what they introduced the founding fathers, like I think Thomas Jefferson is on his cell phone the whole time. He's
The whole time.
And then poor John Adams is
Nobody knows who he is.
And then we have George Washington and Ben Franklin. So
George Washington's he just likes to watch he just like sips the tea.
he just likes to sip the tea while watching the world burn around him. And with Benjamin Franklin, just like when he gets introduced, I could kind of tell that there was going to be something that was going to come out of this guy that is not going to be good. So I think Mark makes us anticipate these things with the quality of like the way that people are speaking to. Like, he was speaking, good old Ben was speaking in a very, you know, like this soft, you know, kind of like almost like seducing way.
So
you know what? Yes,
Lasciviously.
yes, exactly. So it's not. My point is that it's not completely random. He throws things in for you to then be able to understand why it is that he took these particular artistic choices.
What I really liked was the ending where no one was saying anything. Everyone was completely quiet, and he was still just super in it. And instead of like getting embarrassed or ashamed, he just like pushes the chair and is angry, like, "Don't lie to me and tell me you don't want to know." But it's like probably like, no, dude, like nobody wants to know.
Well, I would.
And on that note.